wow, it's so important in the world to have spaces that don't feel like exactly what you described, that are demanding something from you for you to be able to show up impactfully.
Privilege is all around you. It's useless until you recognize it. So it's time to stop feeling guilty and figure out how to use your privilege to make an impact.
I'm Amber Cabral, and this is Guilty Privilege. Welcome back to another episode of Guilty Privilege. My name is Amber Cabral, and today I have the privilege of talking to Thomas James. He is a curator of arts and culture and the executive director of the Last Resort Artist Retreat, which is amazing, by the way. I've had the fortunate opportunity to go. And today we're going to talk about equity in the arts and the importance of thinking about the way that you show up in your community when you're trying to build the relationships that you need to grow your art career, and also why it's important that people of color participate in the fine art world. So Thomas, I'm so glad that you joined me on this podcast. You're one of the most interesting people I know.
Oh, wow.
And you also have a job that I don't really understand, but I know is really cool. So can you tell us what you do exactly? And also just kind of like how you got started doing it.
I'm originally from the DMV area.
Yeah.
And so being a product of that area, when I was growing up, I was very immersed in the universe of go-go music, go-go culture.
Right.
So during that time, I really paid attention to my surroundings. So I was always interested in what was interesting the folks that I was around. So,
right.
So for a while, as I was, attending parties and things like that, and not even just parties, but like the entire atmosphere. So all of the, at the time, everything that was happening on Facebook at that time,
yeah.
and kind of just like the entire apparatus. So from there, I started, selling clothes and jewelry and stuff.
Yes, I can imagine this with
you. and things that people liked, around that. As I kind of became more and more immersed in that world, I started to become very impressed by the people that were actually producing a lot of the parties and other happenings, kind of in that world. So some friends and I, we started our own promotional group to where we used to promote for go-go shows, bands, and then we ended up throwing our own parties, and that was kind of my introduction to the arts and cultural world.
Yes.
And so from there, that was, fast forward a little bit, end of high school, college, started really doing a lot of programming because of different clubs and organizations I was with, different positions I held.
And you're not talking about computer programming, you're talking about events programming.
Exactly, yes.
Right.
So, anything from discussions, community discussions with law enforcement or sex education or, movie nights, things like that, anything that would engage an audience. I was, doing a lot of those programs. And then I started a photography practice. And so that was kind of my introduction to the fine art world.
Yeah, okay.
And so, through photography, whether I had a studio practice, a lot of internet, based projects, editorial projects with magazines, et cetera, kind of through the culmination of all of that I was able to be introduced to the gallery world, the museum world, and really presenting artists and art through exhibitions as well as exhibition programming. And that led me to my current role that I do.
Right.
Which is I am the executive director of the Last Resort Artist Retreat.
Yes.
Which is an artist residency based in Baltimore. And in that space, we specialize in bringing creatives, mainly Black creatives, to this space to engage in, we'll say, programming around rest, rejuvenation, and incubation. And so we bring folks for periods as long as a month to as short as a long weekend. Gotcha. And so that includes curated groups of creatives that we curate, and we bring people from all different types of creative backgrounds and practices, as well as artist collectives, whether that's formal or informal, and organizations that are doing different sorts of grassroots work.
I'm just going to say, honestly got to know you because of the last resort, but kind of not, right? So our meeting happened because just like my day-to-day job, right? I kind of put a call out, asked for some information, ended up passing it along, trying to support some work that a client was doing. And we ended up kind of basically ending up on the same email. Like I was like, oh, okay, this is someone that I have kind of haphazardly, accidentally helped, in this space. And I'll be honest, like I would not have considered myself really even that interested in art. Like outside of just like the broad sense, I think that most people think about it, like, I like nice photography, or, I listen to music, or, I enjoy ballet, but like not in a broad sense. Like I enjoy like art exhibitions. I enjoy like the curation of the presentation of, right? It's not a thing I thought about. As a result of my dear friend Conrad, I ended up going to the last resort, which is where I actually met you in person. So we met over email and then I met you in person at the last resort, and it was amazing. It was amazing.
It was a ton of fun.
It was so much fun. And I almost didn't go. Right. I almost didn't go. And I ended up going simply because Conrad was like, are you kidding? You need to go to this event, to this event that's being held at the last resort. And initially I was like, who is this person and why is he inviting me to his home? So can you talk a little bit about like what started the last resort, who also, and just kind of like what you hope artists gain from the experience of the retreat? Because I had the experience and I wasn't even there all weekend, and it was impactful and amazing. I carried it with me for a long time. Yeah. But I would love for you to just talk a little bit about that. I hope you're enjoying today's episode. And if you happen to also be looking for tools to help you navigate tough conversations, to be able to show up as a more impactful ally, or just to have resources about how to navigate equity in your world, I've written 2 books. My first book is called Allies and Advocates. And this book is really focused on helping you show up as a more impactful ally. It has actual tactics and tips and things that you can practice to help you get there, both for yourself and for others. My second book is called Say More About That. Now, Say More About That is more about helping you to speak up, to push back, to challenge, to be able to have those conversations that sometimes get a little bit difficult. And in fact, I've given you actual scripts to help you to be able to do that. So if you're interested in just having a few extra resources in your pocket to be able to help you to navigate any of those things, you can go pick up those books anywhere where you buy books, or you can pop down into the show notes and click the links and buy them there. Back to the episode.
The Last Resort Artist Retreat was founded in 2020 by Derrick Adams. His idea was to create a space. Derrick Adams is a world-renowned multidisciplinary artist. He's from Baltimore, but his practice and studio is in New York. But so he came back to Baltimore to essentially be a supporter of the arts and culture sector that's happening in Baltimore. Yeah. So he and we met because we ended up on the same advisory board curating exhibitions at the UB Blake Cultural Center, which is an arts nonprofit there in Baltimore. At the time when we met, I was working at a different nonprofit called Creative Alliance. Okay. While I was there, I was the visual arts director. So I was directing all of the gallery presentations, the residency program that was there, different types of workshops and programming. Yeah. And but then when Derrick told me about his vision for The Last Resort, he asked me if I'd be interested in coming on. And I said yes. And so about, after some time, I became the first staff member at The Last Resort. And so when you came, I was the executive director, facilities manager, event coordinator, program director, et cetera, and it was amazing. Yeah, but luckily now, after really 3 years of hard work and generous support of a lot of individuals and foundations, I've been able to hire staff. So we're now fully rocking and rolling.
I want to talk a little bit about The Last Resort. It's amazing. And I keep saying that, but it's hard to describe. So if I were to talk about what happened for me, first of all, I didn't know who Derrick Adams was, which is why I was like, no, you have to tell people who that is. Right. Because then you Google him and you're like, oh, okay. Yeah. Unless you're in the art world or just generally, have an interest in Black art, then you will probably know who he is. But I didn't. And then I got this invitation and I kind of was like, I don't know who this person is. I'm not sure that I'm going to respond. Maybe this is a general, broad reaching invitation. And then a friend of mine, who was on last season, Conrad, actually said, no, you should go. It's at Derrick Adams' house. I was like, who is Derrick Adams? Yeah. And so what was great about it to me, first of all, it came at a time where I was traveling insane amount for work. I also didn't know that, like, I had never considered rest as a community experience. And then the third thing was I met so many people.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened for our, I'll just say cohort, I guess, of folks, we came in, we played games at night, we laughed a lot, we ended up having some amazing meals. Artists came through and talked about their work. It was a really almost intentionally curated networking event, but surrounding art and artistry. And of course, I ended up deciding to make a purchase that night because I saw a piece of art in Derrick's house that I was like, oh my gosh, I have to have that, right? Which was my first like piece of art that I've ever actually been like, oh, I have to negotiate this and figure it out. So for me, it was an outstanding experience. But like, talk to us about talk about the last resort. Like, I think it's something that, especially in this age of us always talking about self-care, it's something that would be really, like, people should understand what it is that you're doing.
Yeah. So I'll set the scene. So it's nestled in a historically Black neighborhood that is really positioned perfectly for a residential stay. It's a residential neighborhood, but it's very close to a lot of cultural institutions, academic institutions. So Johns Hopkins University is in walking distance. The Baltimore Museum of Art's in walking distance. The a few other higher education institutions, Towson University, Goucher College, a drive down the street. The two arts districts, two of the arts districts in Baltimore, a drive down the street. So. But the house is a large 8-bedroom house with everything is white. There's a big white picket fence, and when you open it up, you can see the homestead, which has a wraparound porch. And then when you walk up to the porch and you walk inside, you see this all white house that is decorated with tons of colorful rugs and pillows and all types of artwork from Black artists from across the globe. Multidisciplinary, multi-generational. Like I say, I think it's an 8-bedroom house. There's 9 common spaces. There's an outdoor patio space that is fully paved, so we're able to hold events on that space. There's about a half an acre of green space, part of which we are developing into a public art garden. And then there's also a multi-purpose space where we can hold a lot of wellness activities. So that could be yoga, mindfulness, meditation, any type of, we can have small art exhibitions in there. So receptions, even lectures, cocktail parties, really anything that we want kind of separate from the house. And the programming that we have within the space is to connect people without any with no pressure to exchange anything monetarily. There's no, we want impactful interactions that are non-transactional. So that's a lot of what you experience. So when we curate these dinner programs or these overnight cohorts, these weekend long cohorts, etc., we try to bring together groups of very interesting people. So that are in the arts ecosystem. So when you were there, I'm trying to remember who exactly was there, but we had curators, we had artists, we had directors of arts nonprofits, folks that are in the financial sector, like Conrad, who are advocates of the arts. And over dinner, over the games that we played, or even just sitting around in the living room, we're able to not only have fun and get to know each other, but there is that space for these really impactful conversations in which we can strategize and just think about the past and the present and how that's going to affect the future. So I remember my fiance was there, and we were all talking about her business, and a friend of mine, Malik Glee, he was there, and he was talking about how important it is to support a lot of these Black run like small web series on YouTube, and kind of how it's important for networks to pick these up, and conversations that wouldn't necessarily happen in a house setting if it's if there is some sort of I don't know, end game, if you will. These
Right.
are conversations where it's kind of like you're amongst friends to a certain degree,
Exactly.
because the space really lends itself to be very vulnerable,
Right.
for people, because it's the way that we look at things. We want to make that lasting impression, and a lot of that comes from, again, these sort of unexpected moments of vulnerability, and when you walk away like, wow, that felt really good, and
Yeah.
and that's a lot of, we've essentially tried to create a think tank at grandma's house.
It was literally like, it was a conversation amongst friends who were strangers. It really
Yeah.
was. I mean, it was clear that some of you knew each other. But for me, I'm like, I'm coming from like, small business owner, at that time, like, again, traveling a lot because it was, before the pandemic. Really? Wasn't that before the pandemic? It was in the midst of it. It was in the midst of it. Yes, it was in the midst of it. Oh, that was another reason why I was like, I don't know if I'm going to this
Yeah,
thing,
it was
right?
2021.
Yes. So it was kind of like things. Yes. Okay. So there was also this moment of like, I think, now that I'm reframing it, actually, it was probably a lot of us wanted to connect. And I would have never met these people like in a million years. I follow the majority of the folks who were there still on Instagram. I met artists I hadn't thought about. I realized that I liked art. It was the first experience I had. And the piece I bought was Rashad Newsom's work.
Yes.
And I walked up to that piece and was just like, wow. And I came back to it. And then I came back to it again. And then I posted it on Instagram and I tagged him and he was like, oh, wow. So then we started talking about it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm about to buy a piece of art. Like it's an unforgettable experience. And I'm sure that a lot of the conversation that we had, which for me was with a bunch of perfect strangers. I still follow Malik. When I think about the way we need to heal as humans to get to the place where we can treat each other equitably and understand that we all have like some of the same basic fundamental needs, it's that experience. It's the way it felt to like, I don't know you. I kind of have a loose idea what you might be interested in, but I trust the experience that I'm having in this home. And I also trust what the home will provide from an, like a visual stimulation standpoint, an activity standpoint. Like, right. There was just a lot of pieces and it was judgment free. I was like, I remember asking like, is this free? Like, does this cost? And you're like, no, for the artist, it isn't a cost. And I'm like, wow, it's so important in the world to have spaces that don't feel like exactly what you described, that are demanding something from you for you to be able to show up impactfully. I was not expecting anything but walk away with a lot of new relationships. Like your fiance, like all of those things would not have happened had Conrad and I've been like, you need to go to this thing. So I think the last resort I think the work that y'all are doing is incredible.
Thank you.
I think it's super impactful and really, really important. One of the things you mentioned is it's about leisure therapy, right? We are leisuring, right?
Yes.
Can you talk about what that means, you think, for the Black community?
I've really had to think about a lot, especially since the racial reckoning of the pandemic. And I'll bring it back. I might take it to the side for a second.
Hey there, I hope you're enjoying the episode. And in fact, if you are, you can bring me to your organization or event to help you bring conversations like this to life in your workspaces. This is something I do for a living. I do coaching, I do training, I do executive consulting, whatever it is that you might need as it relates to trying to figure out how to activate allyship or equity in your space. It's probably something I can support. So if you're interested in how we can work together, you can reach out to me at cabralco.com or pop down into the show notes and click the link, book a discovery call, and we will chat with you soon. Back to the show.
During the pandemic, when, at the height, when there was this narrative of people being able to step back and take a break and those sorts of narratives, myself, and I know a lot of other creatives and just a lot of Black people in general, that wasn't necessarily our experience.
It wasn't available.
There was almost a homogeneous group of individuals that had the ability to take a step back and I don't even think it might not necessarily be the right word. They really got to take a step back and listen. A lot of the work that we were doing was a lot of talking.
Right.
And so we may have been afforded the space at that time to speak and really have our perspectives, our feelings, things that we may not have been comfortable saying before, have those be considered. But taking a break, I did not experience that.
Yeah.
To bring it back to the last resort, that is really being able to create a safe space where like-minded people can congregate, can express their ideas, etc. That's one of the crux of the programming. And so, and even for us, I was speaking about this endeavor with Derrick even before the pandemic. And so, so even through all of that, our ideas of leisure had shifted. Like at first, a lot of what we thought about was like, people aren't going to do anything when they come here.
Right. They're just going to lay around.
Yeah, they're just going to lay around. And then we started to think about it. We're like, well, we started thinking about labor different ways. We're like, well, labor can be leisure if people want. Exercise can be leisure. Writing can be leisure. All of these different things. And so the programming then really, and the mission really sort of shifted to equating leisure and autonomy and agency, and the intersection of those and what that meant for the organization. So what that really ends up looking like when people come on site, we provide programming options.
Yeah.
We might bring in a yoga instructor or a masseuse.
Right.
And you can indulge in that if you choose. If not, if you want to lay around and binge watch Netflix all day,
you can do that too.
You can do that. We might go on a nature walk. We might go have dinner at this restaurant, or go to this exhibition opening, or go to this talk or whatever as a group or as two people, or you can just walk around. You can do whatever is going to bring you what you need in that moment. We are going to be the facilitators of that. And I think that and especially, having it be paid for,
right,
is that the financial burden is not there.
Yeah.
And again, there's no burden, there's no expectation to create anything. That's really how things have progressed, and kind of what we see as leisure.
A couple things I want to pull out first, just kind of on that same kind of point about leisure. I think the fact that no one has to pay and no one has to do anything, you can just come and indulge, is in and of itself leisure. Like, I remember the first few hours I was there, I was like, do we have to listen to a multi-level marketing conversation? what's the piece? Like, what is the thing that you need for me to be engaged here, right?
Timeshare?
Yeah, exactly. Like, what's happening, right? And it was like, no, and this is your room, and I'm like, oh, so I'm just free to like move about, like the whole house, like by myself. It was we don't have access to that. So like, I want to like really drive that home, that's important. The second thing is, I think it's important for you to tell people, like artists, like how do they do they just go to a website? How do they find out about it? How do they get a residency if that's what they would like to do? Yeah,
that's a great question. So the residency itself, as far as the coming on site, so we have different types of residencies and retreats. So for some of them, they're 4-week-long residencies for 4 artists at a time. But then we also bring in practitioners and just other folks in the arts ecosystem to stay maybe for long weekends, etc. So, I mean, the best way to get in touch with us is just going through the website, which is is TLRAR.org, which is the acronym.
Yes.
And honestly, for us, we're very open to really responding to what the community needs. So, we get a lot of inquiries about who we are, what we do, etc. And some things fit the mission and others don't. And so, but when things do fit the mission, we try to make a concerted effort to really try and ingratiate those organizations or individuals into the programming that we do. And so that could mean finding a long weekend to bring your organization on site to do some sort of retreat and collaborate with your leaders to create something that will be impactful. Or it could simply be inviting someone on site for a tour, or to one of our dinner programs, etc. So that's the best way to get in contact.
Got it. Makes sense. So I have a couple questions specifically about the art world that I think you're probably the best person I know to answer. Historically, Black and brown folks have not necessarily had access to art. And that's both, I mean, we've always been artists. We haven't always been valued as artists. We also haven't necessarily been the ones to collect or even know how to get into the space to begin to collect, right? Again, I was totally blown away that I went to this random house of this random artist that I hadn't heard of and walked away a, you know, big budding collector, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about why it's important that, you know, Black and brown folks do lean into both creating and acquiring art?
Yeah. Well, I think that in the big picture, in the larger lexicon, you know, the fine art industry is a multi-billion-dollar
Absolutely
industry that, you know, Black and brown folks should just, you know, we need some parts.
We need some,
we
right.
need
We need
parts.
some land.
And
Right,
exactly.
right.
So just thinking about it from that sort of lens
Mm-hmm.
is important framing,
Mm-hmm.
because, you know, it's a sector of the economy that, you know, Black people are in some way, shape, or form already involved.
Yeah.
And there, you know, there should be some level of ownership and control in
Absolutely.
different ways. So so that just on the commercial side. But it's important for Black and brown artists of color, new collectors, and even just collectors in general, to have access to this fine art world, because our, you know, much like any other sector, you know,
Mhm.
our expertise, our experiences, our interests,
Yep.
etc., you know, bring something to the table. You know, whether it could be fine art, but that's also STEM programming, where
Right.
we get, you know, these amazing inventions that we still use today,
Yeah.
or, you know, in the culinary world or the literary world,
Right.
or interior design, etc., etc. For me personally, when I think about access, I think about it to the art world. I think about it as a means for change. When we think about symbols of revolution, just think about that in general. You know, the Ankh sign or the Black Power fist, or
Right.
you know, these you know, music or chants, or
Right.
you know, these sorts of elements that have stood the test of time. You know, all of those, you know, that's design.
Right.
You know, that is bringing creativity, that's bringing, you know, screen printers and folks like that, bringing them in and being able to create these items for, you know, for change, for propaganda.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. So then to kind of bring it back, especially for collectors and just folks that are just interested in the arts ecosystem in general. You know, the art world can be very exclusionary.
Yeah.
It can be very cliquey.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that reason is because the commercial aspect of the art world is, it's very unregulated.
Yeah.
To be honest, there's a lot of like shady things that are going on, you know, behind the scenes, things like that.
Right.
But in any case, I'm just, yeah, I always want to preface it with that, because it's a lot of what we do see is smoke and mirrors, unless you're really on the inside.
Okay. That's good to know if I want to buy some work. So
yeah, and
how do you know? Like, how do you know how to buy? Like, especially in a, you know, a space we've been excluded from.
Exactly. The point of exactly what you're saying is that there may be an artist that you are very interested in buying work from. There may be a gallery that you're very interested in purchasing work from, but you may never get on their list. You may send an inquiry and say, hey, you know, I'm very interested in buying some, you know, whatever, or even going to a show and, you know, hey, I want to purchase this piece, etc. You may never get a call back. You may never, you know, because again, like that's just how it operates. Again, so like you know, there's cliques and sectors.
I have seen like some artists do some things that I think are intentionally trying to create some equity. I have a couple pieces that I literally only got because I like hit the lottery, basically. Like, you know, the artist posted something on Instagram and basically said, I have 12 of these. The first 12 people to ask, you can buy it. And it's like, this person doesn't make prints. You know what I'm saying? Like the work isn't available otherwise. And so I'm like, okay, so I actually was lucky enough, right? But I think that to your point is trying to create some of that equity that like, if you're not on the list, if you don't know the galleries, if you aren't able, I at least still have an opportunity to.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of artists now are being very intentional about that. So there's an artist named April Bay. She's based in Los Angeles. She had this project where she created these very small original works, but she sold them for 90% off. You know, so that folks who couldn't afford her work otherwise would be able to purchase it. There are a lot of artists that will intentionally say to the galleries that they work with, I want this piece, or X percent of these pieces to go to Black collectors, or et cetera, because if that's not the case, that won't happen. It's important on for the artist side to to try and focus on some of these equitable practices.
Yeah.
But then also for collectors and other folks that are interested in the just being part of the ecosystem, a lot of it is taking up space. So and that comes in a multitude of ways. So a quick example would be, for example, like joining a museum board,
right,
or the board of some sort of arts nonprofit,
right,
or again putting your, whether it's your money or your expertise or sweat equity or whatever, kind of staking your claim in with these organizations, to be able to kind of craft your own way, if you will.
Yeah.
So like, for example, if you're interested in the work of an artist, and you really want other people to, or I should say, if you want the value of the work to go up for, for whatever reason, because you believe in the artist, et cetera, et cetera. If you're on a museum board, one, you can be on the acquisitions team, or committee or whatever, and your voice can be heard in the work that gets acquired. But also, you could buy two pieces from an artist. One piece you keep, the other piece you give to the museum. Instant value, raises.
Increase, right?
So those are just a couple of just like simple examples. But I think overall, especially in the fine art world, especially if we're talking about the commercial world, as a collector, especially a Black collector or a collector of color who might be excluded from some of these circles, it's very important to, you kind of have to be a renegade to a certain degree, and you have to really push your way through.
That's super helpful because I honestly have kind of, I don't want to say stalled, but like hesitated on how to grow my collection. There are things I've wanted, but I'm like, I don't even know how to engage the artist. Like I was lucky because I posted something on Instagram and he responded to me. But I was also very clear, even from you were like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, sometimes that happens, but sometimes they don't say anything, And so that was, I mean, super like helpful for me. But like I have come to realize, especially because, Conrad also has started a collection as well, that it is hard to necessarily be able to gain access and get in. So all right, I have a couple other questions specifically around getting into like the art space. Like I know a few artists. I will say almost all of the people I know who are some of what I consider to be the most amazing artists, but there are also people I know, so I'm probably biased. They are struggling to like break in and like have their work recognized and, be positioned in a way where, someone is actually taking an interest in buying their work, or, having access to the social circles, or having the clout, I guess, necessary to get, buyers' eyes, in their direction. And obviously every artist, especially when we're talking about, fine art, we really want people to be seen. How would you recommend someone position themselves to get connected, like to get in a position where I am an artist, I'd like you to see my work, but like, what's the right, if you were to make a recommendation, what would you say?
I would say a couple of things. First, I think that number one, it's important for any artist to just produce things.
Yes.
So
okay.
And I'll expand on that because I don't want to make it sound too simple.
Yeah, you're not just like, just make things.
Yeah, so
right.
like making work is one thing.
Yeah.
If that's what you want to do, then you should continually make work. But also, I believe that as an artist, you should also be making other culturally relevant things. So that could be a blog where you write about the shows that are happening in your area, because most places that aren't New York City in the States, most of them don't have an arts and culture column in their local newspaper anymore. It's all been cut. So so like writing about art, showing up to other artists' shows, things like that, becoming part of the community, getting involved with organizations that are in your area. It's a lot of slow burn, natural socializing. Well, I mean, yes, but I think also more importantly, and this is the only way that I was able to garner any success, really, is just showing up.
Yeah.
So so I live in Baltimore, but I've had when friends have shows, DC is 45 minutes.
Yeah.
That's not super far, but I'm busy.
Right.
So like if people know, okay, I'm on a Thursday night, I'm shooting down to DC to come see your show. People appreciate that.
Yeah.
You know, or if a good friend has a show in Philly or New York, or, you know, some way that you can, you know, I can just shoot up the, you know, the Beltway or something. Or a couple years ago, I had a show in LA, and Malik, our friend, he was in Sacramento, and he was like, Thomas has a show. This is a big deal.
Yeah.
I'm going to come and just support, because I'm, you know, we're coincidentally here at the same time. And those things mean a lot.
Yeah.
And so for an artist, you can always cold call people like, hey, come check my stuff out. You can post it on Instagram, etc. But you're not going to get not any, I mean, you might get lucky, but for the most part, if you want authentic feedback, authentic critique, authentic relationship building, you have to be doing that. And you don't necessarily have to go to an art opening and do the whole thing with wine and cheese and blah, blah, blah. But for example, if somebody, I mean, I might be a little different because people shoot me messages on Instagram all the time, and I'll respond because I'm like, you know, I enjoy doing that. But if people aren't on Instagram or something like that, let's say you wanted to garner the attention of a curator at, you know, whatever museum in whatever city you live in or whatever. If that curator or whoever is involved with some other organization, you might say, hey, you know, I'll come and volunteer for this organization. Or I'm just kind of thinking of these things off the top of my head.
What you're basically saying is like, if you want to be a part of the community, you need to participate.
You know what? Yes, you have to be part of the community at the end of the day.
Right.
And
sometimes artists don't want to commune. They want to, you know, isolate in art. You know, they don't always understand the value of like, yes, you might be, you know, a person who feels more like introverted and, you know, in your own brain, which I think a lot of the artists that I know kind of are that way.
Yeah, but I think it's also,
I think we have to get past the idea that that's a reason to not.
Yes. And especially if you are an artist that, you know, you may not have the merit or the credentials. So, you know, if you go to art school, then it doesn't really matter if you're a studio rat and you're in your studio all the time, you're not socializing, whatever, because you went to art school. So you have these professors who are doing things. You have this built-in community that you can lean into. Exactly. But if you're an independent artist or, you know, more self-taught, or anyone that's even just outside of the art school bubbles, like I didn't go to art school. So like, even if you are outside of that, you do have to become part of the community to be able to garner those relationships. And so I think that may be just like a small piece of the puzzle that people are missing. And I think that's important to note. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay. So I have a question I ask every guest. Okay. And I'm sure you probably know because you told me you watched the podcast. So, but I want to ask you, and I'll give you this little kind of foreground. Essentially, the name of the show is Guilty Privilege. And the reason it's called Guilty Privilege is because I think privilege is something we tend to feel a little bad about or embarrassed by, or we, you know, sometimes want to hide it or be defensive about it. And really, privilege honestly gives us a lot of power and access. Yeah. And so I ask every guest, what privilege do you have that you refuse to feel guilty about?
I refuse to feel guilty about leaning into my community to give me what I need. So what I mean by that is part of the reason why I was able to maneuver the way that I have in my field is because I had parents. I had my mom after college let me move back in, you know, to her home. Yeah. So that, you know, I could, you know, pay minimal rent and I could spend most of my money doing my independent practice that ended up catapulting me to other things. Right. You know, I have friends that, you know, if I need an opportunity or if I need them to introduce me to someone, I'm not afraid to ask because I'm like, hey, we are supposed to be in community. I would do the same for this person, and I expect them, not expect, but I would hope that they would do the same for me. Right. A lot of people kind of shy away from having that privilege that they might not even know that they have.
Good relationships, I mean, powerful.
Exactly.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. I'm Amber Cabral, and you're watching Guilty Privilege.